Good morning. So today we're going to be working through a problem that is going to be structured similarly to the final. And I'll just go ahead and tell you guys, right, that the primary issue related to this particular problem is licenses, right, related to Thursday's lecture. But there's other stuff going on in it as well. So I'm going to put the problem in the chat for you. And let me get that. And not quite done. It's a little bit more. Okay, so here is the problem. Tom was the fee simple owner of Firefly, a beachfront villa. The villa also houses a bed and breakfast for tourists. In 2010, he told his niece Catherine that she could live with him at Firefly rent-free for as long as she desired, provided she assisted Tom with the cooking for the tourists and did the necessary repairs to the villa. Tom explained to Catherine that he was unable to pay her as much as she earned in her previous job. Catherine gave up her job as a live-in helper, which paid very well, and moved into Firefly. Catherine was afraid of burglars, so she installed a high-tech security system at Firefly. Tom was present when Catherine had the security system installed. Catherine also installed new windows to the guest rooms at Firefly because the old windows were damaged in a storm in 2013. The installation was very costly. Catherine had discussed these repairs with Tom before repairing the windows. At that time, Tom told her to go ahead. Tom sells the Firefly to Jim. Jim has served Catherine with a notice to quit the Firefly. Advise Catherine. So this is the basic structure of the final exam. Okay, you get some facts, and they are intended to lay out certain issues, and then you're asked to give advice. So the first step in this process, right, before you can do anything, you have to know what the issues are. Okay, so you have to be able to read the fact pattern and discern what issues are arising out of these facts. Okay, so a way to think about this that may be helpful is if you were in Catherine's shoes and you had just been served a notice to quit the place that you've been living for 10 years, what would be the first thing that you would be concerned about? I think somebody said something in chat, but I took off my glasses. No, nobody said anything in chat. Okay. So if you were Catherine, what would be the most important thing for you right now? Come on, guys, you've just been told to move out of your house. What are you doing?
Finding somewhere else to go and live, an alternative option.
Right. The most important thing for Catherine is, where am I going to live? Okay. Now, because this is a property law class, right? In the real world, you guys and Catherine probably would go, okay, I'm going to go live somewhere else. Okay, but this is a property law class. The real world is a little disconnected from this. And so the first question needs to be, does Catherine really have to move out? Okay, but you're absolutely right that the first question is, where am I going to live? And the answer is, well, I want to stay here in Firefly where I have lived, where I have invested money into various repairs and enhancements. And I want to, and so what rights do I have to stay? So with that in mind, what rights does Catherine have to stay at Firefly?
The fact that she helped install new windows and a high-tech security system might give her some rights, but at the end of the day, Tom is the fee simple owner, so that might be a little problematic for her.
And
Because she
presumably
does,
what he sold to Jim was fee simple. If you wanted to complicate your analysis, you could ask the question, what would happen if Tom sold less than fee simple, but that's not called for. So you don't have to answer like that. But what kind of right does Catherine have?
Morning, sir. Is it an equitable right?
I'm not sure that that's a categorization that's meaningful here, right? Although we'll talk about sort of what role equity might play as things go on. But at this point, we're just asking, what is the label that we're going to put on Catherine's rights here? Does Catherine own the land? There's a really
No, she doesn't own the land.
No, she does not own the land. Does she have a lease?
No, she
I
has a license.
don't think so.
Sorry, Crystal, what did you say?
I think she has a license.
Right. So Catherine is a licensee. She does not own an interest in the land. She does not have, she's not a tenant. She just has permission to occupy. Okay, she's in exactly the same boat as I was in the dorms at my university, and as you guys may be in the halls of residence at UWI. Okay, so what rights does a licensee have? Go ahead, Crystal.
Oh.
So let's start with.
Thinking that it's a contractual license that she'll have, right?
Okay, why would you say that it's a contractual license?
There were still terms that were granted.
So because there's consideration.
Yeah. But to me, it's a licensee. She's a licensee, but what was expressed could still be employed.
What do you mean by what was it
So then
expressed?
she would obviously think that she has some kind of rights as a you know what, let me scrap that. Go
What,
ahead,
what,
sir. Let's scrap that.
well, what are you scrapping? Like so far, I haven't heard anything that I'm concerned about.
Oh, okay. I was saying that she will be a contractual licensee
Okay. And
because there were terms in the contract. Well, as a licensee, there were terms.
right. So there was mutuality of obligation, right?
Yeah.
She's allowed to live there. She has this, Tom grants her this license, and in exchange, she agrees to provide these services, right? Help with the cooking, do the repairs, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that seems right to me. We have this contractual agreement between uncle and niece. Okay. So what rights does a contractual license holder have as to a third party in law? Let's start with law.
Could you repeat the question, sir?
I just here reading over the
Sure.
facts here first.
Sure. What, for anybody who needs the question repeated, the question is, what rights does a contractual licensee have with regard to third parties? So Tom has sold the property to Jim, okay? What rights does Catherine have that she can enforce against Jim?
Hello, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, it says that a contractual license may be short-term, medium-term, or long-term, and where the contractual license.
I'm real tired of students giving me irrelevancies. Okay, and I'm not trying to pick on you, Rommel, or anybody in particular, but when I ask a question, I want an answer to the question. So what rights does a contractual licensee have with regard to third parties? Answer that question. No other question.
Sir, okay, so since Catherine was initially given permission from the get-go, all of a sudden there's a no split. So to me, it's like he knowingly induces the breach of the contractual license. So to me, he may have committed a tort in inducing the breach of the
This
contract.
is not answering the question.
It's not.
What contractual rights does she have to enforce against Jim?
All I know is that he's liable to pay for the
What contract does she have with Jim?
license, contractual license.
No,
No? Okay.
no, she has no contract with Jim. Jim has no agreement.
So would this not be a verbal agreement, oral?
Show me where Jim agreed.
Okay, so I think as you said, there's no contract because the contract was with her and Tom, but there was actually no contract between her and Jim, and basically
Yes, that
she
is
has no
correct.
interest.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So Dylan asks, could she claim that the license is irrevocable? Well, let's think back to Thursday's lecture, right? Which of the 4 types of licenses are classed as irrevocable? Is a contractual license classified as irrevocable?
It would be beer license, sir.
I'm sorry?
It would be beer license that is revocable.
A bear license is revocable, right? Somebody comes up to your front door and knocks on your door, and you don't want them, you don't want the vacuum cleaner they're selling, you can throw them off your property, right? You absolutely can revoke a bear license. So what kind of license would not be revocable? Okay, let's back up a little bit more. What are the 4 types of licenses? We know that we've mentioned 2 of them, the bear license and the contractual license. What are the other 2?
Hello, sir. Yes,
Yes,
there will be
go ahead.
a license coupled with an interest. I think that's the one that you're speaking about.
Right, that's one of them. What's the last one?
That would be a contractual license coupled with an equity.
We've already mentioned a contractual license, so that's not the 4th. That's not the 4th type.
But then it will be license protected by estoppel.
Right, license protected by estoppel. So of those 4, which ones cannot be revoked? Think about it like this. Like, given what you know about what these types of licenses are, and I guess if none of you attended Thursday's lecture, that would be problematic. But given what we know about what are these 4 types of licenses, which one seems like it would be irrevocable, given the circumstances that surround them?
So that would be license coupled with an interest.
Right, because the interest is not revocable. You own the interest in the land. The license is intended to allow you to effectively exercise your interest. And so it is not revocable. Okay. Given that fact, do we think that contractual licenses are irrevocable? Dylan, what do you think? Because the question was yours.
I think it depends on the circumstance.
Okay, in what sense? I mean, that's a very lawyerly answer, so I appreciate it, but what makes you say that?
Well, as per the textbook, they see here, it depends on the availability of equitable remedies, such as injunction or specific.
Yeah, and I think that is sort of a key component here, is that the question, like I said at the beginning, I said, okay, what are Catherine's rights in law? And I think that it's possible that some of you guys were thinking that she has legal remedies that are actually equitable. Okay, there may be some equitable rights and remedies that Catherine has that are not legal. And so they're not really responsive to the question of what remedies at law does she have, right? So at law, Catherine has no rights, right? A contractual license can be revoked at any point. Whatever claim there may be is a claim for breach of contract, and it lies against Tom. Okay, doesn't lie against Jim because she doesn't have a contract with Jim. So now let's complicate the question a little bit, right? And get into some of the things that I think some of you guys wanted to talk about a minute ago, which was Catherine's equitable rights and remedies. Okay, so does the fact pattern as it's given to you, does it suggest that there's anything in there that would cause the court to act to prevent a shock to Jim's conscience, right? Would Jim's notice to quit be classified as unconscionable?
Sorry, repeat question.
Sure, right? So the whole theory of equity is that equity steps in to prevent a shock to the conscience, to prevent somebody from behaving unjustly. So is there something about Jim's notice to quit that would give rise to equitable rights?
I would say yes, as it relates to the recovery of all the funds that she would have actually put into reconstructing this place. So yeah, I would say yes.
So maybe she has to move out, but she's going to be getting a great big chunk of money for the costs of all these repairs that she's done. Is that what
Yes,
you're
sir.
saying?
That's what I'm saying, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, well, that seems like an interesting argument. What is the theory that leads you to that? Like how would you analyze that issue to get to that conclusion?
Mm.
I'll give you a hint, which is that I had the same thought as I was writing the fact pattern, that this was a likely outcome. And it is based in things that you guys have already learned. Okay, so you don't need any, it's not confined within licenses, because I told you that wasn't everything that was in this problem, but it is, you know it from things you learned in this class.
So you're asking what would be the issue, like how we would construct the issue as it relates to equitable interest?
I'm asking what's the logic, what's the reasoning that gets you to the conclusion that she's going to have to move out, but she's going to get a big a pile of money.
I don't know at the moment. I don't know if anyone else can answer.
I think it's because he had a duty of care to tell her to give her sufficient notice to leave, and he just put out just so, especially after she would have come to him saying that, could I do XYZ repairs, and then random he said yes, and then after he come telling she could go. I think that's a little inequitable.
Say that again a little more slowly, please. I didn't quite catch all of it, I think.
Oh, sorry, I was saying that how that he had a duty of care to give a reasonable notice to leave, and due to him not giving like sufficient notice to leave, and or even like giving her the like equivalent of money for the stuff she would have put in the house. That is why.
Well, okay, so as I understand it, you're arguing that there's a duty of care here. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I would encourage you to be very careful about using terms of art from tort law in these circumstances. Like I understand what you're saying and where you're going with this, but like if you were to use the phrase duty of care on a final exam, an external marker might mark you off for that. You know, my goal in marking is to read between the lines to understand what you're saying, and only to mark off for vocabulary where the vocabulary matters. But not everyone shares that philosophy. So I would encourage you to be careful about that. However, to talk about sort of the substantive answer, right? The idea is, I understand what you're saying, is that Tom has taken this obligation to provide a roof for Catherine in exchange for her services. And consistent with that obligation is an obligation to provide her with the necessary time to be able to replace what he provides when he is no longer willing to provide it. Is that how I understand your argument?
Yes.
Okay. So this is part of the problem with equity, which is that I am confident that your argument does not carry the day in court, but I don't have a great explanation as to why. So here are my sort of half-baked thinking out loud thoughts about this, which is that I think you've offered a sound argument, right? I don't want you to think that I'm criticizing the argument itself. The reason that I don't think it is a winning argument is that the contract sort of contains its own terms. And if we look to the parole evidence rule from contract law, right, we can only go beyond the term, the document itself, the agreement itself, if there's an ambiguity in it. And I have to be frank, I don't see an ambiguity here. So to some extent, ambiguity is where you find it, and so you can make an argument that something is ambiguous and sort of see what you can do. So, Dylan, you've come off mute. Do you have something?
Yes, sir. I think I'm echoing. In regards to what Crystal was saying about the sum of money, could it be that she could claim the sum of money off of, I think it was Tom who sold the place to Jim? Yes. Off of Tom, given that these, as the question or as the facts state, that the installations made were quite costly, and that since these fixtures were made and they would have added to the property value, that which would have increased the price that Jim would have bought the Firefly for.
Right. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that, you know, the fact that Tom knows about these installations, right, the security system and the new windows, I think that strengthens that argument that the claim is against Tom for the increased value of the property from these two installations. But let's get really creative here, okay? Could Catherine make a claim for an equitable lease? So let's ask this question a little bit differently, right? What are the requirements to be able to create an equitable lease, right? We could have a lease created under a trust, which would be an equitable lease. We could have a lease created pursuant to a contract, right, which would be an equitable lease. Or we could have a lease created by estoppel. Okay, so we don't have a trust. The contractual lease doesn't exist because the contract, as it's stated, doesn't recite the intent to create a lease. So we're missing that element. But what about a lease by estoppel? So could she assert an equitable lease by estoppel? So think back to what the elements of estoppel are: promise, reliance, and detriment. Do we have those three things here? Do we have the promise? Come on, guys, do we have a promise?
Yes.
Yeah, we have a promise. Like 80% of it, like I have to be honest with you guys. Like, I feel like you guys jump in on the really hard questions and then you sort of sit there on the really easy ones. Like you think, oh, it can't be that easy. I promise it is. If you think it's easy, it's easy. So we have a promise. Do we have reliance? Did Catherine take some sort of action based on the promise that Tom made her?
Yes, she had
Yes.
left
Yes,
her
Edwin,
previous
Yes, she
job,
did.
Right. She left her
previous
job.
higher
Right.
paying previous job.
Right. She left her job. Was it to her detriment?
yeah.
Yes.
Eventually, when
Yeah.
she
Yeah,
had sold, when he had
Yeah, she
sold.
takes a pay cut, right? So we've got all of the elements of estoppel here. Okay. And you know, that's going to create some other opportunities for her, right? So if she wants to claim that the license was created by estoppel, then there may be some additional remedies that she can secure from Tom related to that breach of contract, right? That some remedies that may include enforceability against Jim, right? That Tom has to sort of disclose the existence of this license, and it has to be, and it's enforceable against Jim at least for a period of time, right? Maybe she gets another year to sort of sort out her affairs. But the more interesting question is if she has a lease by estoppel. Okay. Equitable lease, not enforceable against Jim, so she can't just stay there. But if she is an equitable tenant, then she has tenant's rights. And who's responsible for the security system and the new windows?
Catherine.
Right. And so does she have a right to remove them? Maybe. Right? We're not, I don't well, yeah, I mean, this gets in, but the point being that the last sort of piece of the puzzle is if Catherine has an equitable lease, which I think you can make an argument for based on an estoppel theory, then you have to go through a fixtures analysis for these two things, right? Are they fixtures? The windows, probably, right? They probably meet the degree of annexation test. Security system probably meets the purpose of annexation test. But then there's the question of, well, does she have the right to remove them? And you have the common law test of decorative and trade fixtures being removable and other fixtures are not. Well, those may not qualify under the common law. test, right? They're certainly not decorative, at least not on these facts. There may be other evidence related to the windows that suggests that maybe they're decorative, right? So if there's stained glass, then that may complicate the analysis, but not on these facts, okay? And they don't support a trade. They aren't used for the trade. They're used for the benefit of the residents of Tom and Catherine. So we probably don't meet the common law removal test. But what if you're in Barbados or Belize? Yeah, where there's a statutory right to remove fixtures. So then you'd have to go through that analysis. Okay. So to sum up, right, to sort of give you the summary of what the best answer to a problem like this would look like, right? You got to start with where Catherine is living, right? How do we resolve the problem of does Catherine have to move out? And as a contractual licensee, the license is revocable at any point. And the claim against that is only for breach of contract. Okay. But equity provides a more complicated answer. Equity may provide, at the very least, that she gets some extra time to stay there through an estoppel theory, either by a license protected by estoppel, in which case she's going to be entitled to some additional time to quit and to find her next step, or through a lease by estoppel, which will afford her termination rights, right, which may be quite extensive, and even if she has to move out, then may give her some rights related to the fixtures that she installed. Okay, so that is how you would organize an exam answer. Okay, and you would need to go through the principles, and you would need to make sure that you talk about how the law shapes all of these things, and where there are cases on point, it is in your interest to mention them. If you don't know them or you can't think of them, the principles are far more important. Okay, so what questions do you guys have about this to sort of understand? Do you understand where we are? What is confusing?
Sir, I had one question. Given that, let's say that if Tom had paid more than her previous job, would it still be to her detriment, given the fact that he had sold the place and she had nowhere to live, or seemingly nowhere to live?
I mean, I think that's a harder question, right? I think that my stance is that I think courts would be unlikely to view that as detriment in that circumstance. Okay, the issue is that the promise induced detrimental reliance, not some subsequent act that changed the circumstances under which the promise was being fulfilled. Okay, so I think you could argue that there was still detrimental reliance because, all of this money that she outlaid for the security system and the new windows, sort of on the basis that she would be living there forever. But that's an argument that you would make. I don't think it would carry water, because I think that the point in time that we're looking for detrimental reliance is the point where the promise is made. Once she moves in, then the question of detrimental reliance sort of falls away. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, sir. Thank you.
Great. What other questions do you guys have?
So one question I have is, the assignment due next week, would that be our last assignment? Given that finals are just now, or would we have one for the following week?
My guess is that will be the last marked assignment. There may be something after that will sort of give you a chance to play with the concepts as we wrap up the semester. But I think that what you're doing this week is likely to be the last thing that will be marked.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay. What other questions?
When answering a problem question, is there anything specific you would like to see in the application section?
I'm not entirely sure what you're asking, so.
Like when answering a problem question using the IRAC format, the application section of the IRAC format, is there anything specific you would like to see us see? Like, do you want it done a certain way? Because I realize lecturers have a particular method. Each lecturer has a different method on how they want us to answer the problem questions.
I don't have a good answer for that, largely because I'm not entirely certain like what the varieties of approaches might look like. I guess my stance is I want to make sure that you guys are working through the actual concept. So in the application, I would really encourage you to, if you've outlined a test, right, that has 3 steps, then you really need to make sure that you say, okay, step 1 is this, and on the facts that we've been given, step 1 goes this way because this fact, right, that either meets or doesn't meet the standard, and go on through, right? So that would be my best suggestion. And if you knew cases and authorities that would sort of point you, where facts had been held to meet a standard, then that would be the place to raise that.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Okay. What other questions are there?
So what we were discussing before we had gotten to the issue of the estoppel, would that be something we would include, or would that be or would you consider that an irrelevancy in this case?
I understand why you're asking. And I think the answer is that if you really feel like something is a necessary foundation for your conclusion, that's not an irrelevancy. And so if that is truly necessary, like if you take it out of your logical chain and now your argument doesn't make sense anymore, then you should include it. Okay. But if you take it out and you still get from your premise to your conclusion, well, then that's something that you don't need. So does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Understood.
Okay. So we're out of time. So I will see you guys tomorrow. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions about the co-tenancy assignment. And take care. Bye.